Mark Allison thought he knew every inch of Cambridgeshire's flat farmland, but he had never seen anything like this. 2,000 cannabis plants glowing under industrial lights in a derelict barn, part of a network worth £1.8 million and hidden in plain sight for years. The flatlands of Cambridgeshire stretched endlessly in every direction, a patchwork of wheat fields, hedgerows, and quiet market towns. On the surface, it was a place where life moved slowly, where the most notable events were the weekly farmers' markets and the changing of the seasons. Villagers knew one another by name, tractors rolled lazily down narrow lanes, and the air smelled of soil and rain. To an outsider, it seemed like the last place anything serious could happen. But within this calm landscape stood an old poultry farm, a forgotten cluster of weather-beaten barns that had not produced a single egg in years. Its rusted gates hung loosely from their hinges, the fencing sagged in places, and weeds had begun to reclaim the cracked yard. It looked abandoned, the sort of place where only birds and the wind made a home. No one in the village paid much attention to it anymore. Children had once played there, daring each other to peek through its dusty windows, but even they had grown bored of it. Farmers passed by without a second glance, assuming the place was just another casualty of changing times. The roof was patched in places with mismatched sheets of corrugated metal, and several windows were boarded over. From the road, it offered no invitation, only the impression of decay. But at night, it was different. On certain evenings, a faint hum seemed to drift on the breeze, a low, constant vibration that did not belong to nature. Now and then, a strange glow escaped from beneath the edges of the roof, a thin strip of unnatural light that would vanish as quickly as it appeared. Few noticed these details, and those who did quickly forgot them. In rural places, people value privacy. If someone wanted to run odd machinery in an old barn, it was assumed they had their reasons. Still, there was something about the farm that made it an uneasy landmark for those who passed after dark. It had no animals, no workers, and no signs of repair, yet it never seemed to fall completely into ruin. The weeds grew tall along the outer fence, but inside the yard, the ground stayed oddly clear, as though someone cared enough to keep it tidy. The land around it had once been alive with noise, clucking hens, machinery clattering, the comings and goings of feed trucks. Now, it was a place of silence. Silence, that is, until the occasional van would pull up to the gate late at night. Its engine would cut, the headlights would vanish, and the vehicle would disappear inside. 10, maybe 15 minutes later, it would be gone, leaving the lane as still as before. These visits happened at irregular intervals, spaced far enough apart that they didn't draw attention from the casual passerby. But for anyone who might have been paying close attention, there was a rhythm to them, a slow, deliberate pattern that hinted at purpose. There had been rumours over the years about the property changing hands. Some said it was bought by a London investor with plans to turn it into storage. Others claimed it had been left to a distant relative who simply didn't care enough to sell it. No one could say for sure. Officially, the farm was still listed as agricultural land, though no crops had been planted there in more than a decade. Paper records showed almost nothing about the current owner. The location was perfect for anyone wanting to keep something hidden. It sat far enough from the nearest village to avoid casual visitors, yet close enough to the main road for easy access. A narrow lane curved towards it, flanked by hedges tall enough to block any curious eyes. In summer, the leaves formed a tunnel, and even in winter, the bare branches created a skeletal screen. The barns themselves were shielded from the road by a long line of poplar trees, planted decades earlier as a windbreak but now serving another purpose entirely. Concealment. It was this quiet, this remoteness, that made the site so ideal for what it had become. By day, it was just another crumbling relic of the countryside, blending seamlessly into its surroundings. By night, it transformed into something else entirely, a place where the hum of unseen machines filled the air, and the faint glow of hidden lights betrayed the truth only to those close enough to notice. For years, it had kept its secret without disturbance. No one came asking questions. No one thought to look inside. And as long as that continued, the secret would grow unchecked, flourishing behind rusted gates under the cover of Cambridgeshire's most unassuming landscape. It was only a matter of time before that secret would become too big to hide. If you want, I can make Chapter 2 equally expanded to match this style so the pacing stays cinematic and suspenseful for the whole documentary. It started as little more than a curiosity, an odd smell carried on the breeze that didn't quite belong in the countryside. It wasn't the earthy scent of tilled soil or the heavy sweetness of silage. It was sharper, more pungent, almost cloying if the wind caught it right. The first to notice was a postal worker, peddling her route along the narrow lane that ran past the old poultry farm. She didn't give it much thought at first. Rural places were full of strange smells: fertilizer, rotting vegetation, damp grain. But this one lingered in her mind, partly because it came and went unpredictably, and partly because she couldn't place it. Over the following days, others began to notice as well. A dog walker passing through the fields thought it was coming from somewhere behind the poplar trees. A man collecting firewood for the winter caught it in the air as he loaded his trailer. Most shrugged it off, but in small communities, even oddities that seem trivial have a way of quietly spreading from one conversation to another. Soon, a few residents began to mutter about the smell when they saw each other in the village shop or at the pub. It wasn't a full-blown rumour, just an observation, but it was enough for it to reach the ears of the local council. An environmental officer was sent to investigate, the kind of routine call that rarely led to anything dramatic. His assumption was that it would turn out to be stagnant water or perhaps an old store of grain going mouldy. On a grey morning, he drove out to the farm, clipboard in hand, expecting nothing more than a quick inspection. The lane to the property was quiet, bordered by hedgerows that seemed to close in as he approached. When he arrived, the first thing he noticed was how sealed off it looked. Heavy metal gates, chained and padlocked. A scattering of warning signs: private property, keep out, hung crookedly but were clearly still meant to deter anyone from wandering in. Above him, 2 CCTV cameras were angled toward the road, small black domes that glinted faintly in the light. The officer called out once, more out of habit than expectation. There was no reply. He lingered for a while, sniffing the air, trying to detect the odor that had brought him there. It was faint that day, barely present, but enough to tell him it wasn't rotting food or waste. He jotted a few notes, made a vague plan to follow up, and left. By the time his report reached the right desk at the council offices, the smell had been mentioned again by other residents. The case was passed to the police, not because anyone thought it was serious, but because there were enough small, unusual details to warrant a closer look. When officers first visited the site, they took the same approach: observe, make notes, and move on. But the combination of CCTV cameras, locked gates, and total lack of visible activity stood out. It didn't match the appearance of a normal farm, abandoned or otherwise. Most derelict properties showed signs of casual trespassing, graffiti, broken glass, discarded rubbish. This one was too well maintained for a place supposedly left to rot. Instead of moving in immediately, the police decided to watch it from a distance. They set up a low-level surveillance operation, keeping marked vehicles away from the area to avoid raising suspicion. An unmarked car was parked in a field entrance down the lane on certain nights. Through binoculars, they noted vehicles arriving. In the small hours, sometimes vans, sometimes unregistered cars, staying just long enough for something to be moved before disappearing again. Each observation added to a growing sense that the property was more than it appeared. The lights in the barns seemed brighter on some nights than others, a sharp white glare that escaped through cracks in the metal sheets. When they checked with the electricity provider, they found a record of unusually high power consumption, higher than most working farms in the region, and vastly more than what should have been used at a supposedly abandoned one. For weeks, the activity continued, erratic enough to avoid forming a clear pattern, but consistent enough to confirm the suspicions building among the officers watching. They began to wonder whether this was part of something bigger than a single isolated operation. The quiet farm in the middle of the Cambridgeshire countryside was beginning to look like it might be connected to a much wider network, one that stretched far beyond the borders of the county. They just needed the right moment to prove it. If you want, I can now expand Chapter 3 to 600 words so the suspense builds smoothly toward the eventual raid. Through the long nights of October, the watchers settled into their routine. The unmarked police cars became a fixture in the hedgerows, their engines off, interiors dark, windows just low enough to aim a camera or raise a pair of binoculars. The officers inside learned the rhythms of the lane, the way it was deserted. After sunset, the occasional rumble of a tractor in the distance, the foxes darting across the road without hesitation. Everything else was still. Still, that is, until the right kind of vehicle appeared. The first visits were subtle. A van would drift into view, headlights cutting briefly across the hedges before vanishing as it turned into the lane toward the farm. The driver never sped, never hesitated. The gates would open just enough to swallow the vehicle whole, closing again behind it within seconds. Sometimes it stayed for 10 minutes, sometimes for nearly an hour. Whatever happened inside the barns was hidden from view, but when the van re-emerged, it always left quickly, disappearing in the direction of the main road. Patterns began to emerge in small, telling ways. Vehicles came mostly on cloudy nights, when the moonlight was weak and shadows ran deeper across the yard. The number plates were often foreign or altered to disguise their origin. Drivers were careful, rarely using the same van twice within a fortnight. There was no chatter, no noise, just a silent choreography repeated again and again under the cover of darkness. From the air, the story was clearer. Police drones captured footage of the barns radiating an intense heat signature, glowing against the cool landscape like two furnaces. The images made no sense for a building supposedly abandoned. The heat was strongest at night, suggesting whatever was running inside was at full power when the world outside was asleep. The electricity company confirmed what the images hinted at: power usage so high it could have kept a small manufacturing plant running. The surveillance grew bolder. Plainclothes officers parked in the village and walked the public footpaths that skirted the farm's perimeter. From certain angles, they could glimpse faint light leaking through gaps in the roof panels, a sharp, artificial brightness that flickered slightly, as though from rows of high-intensity lamps. Even from a distance, the smell was sometimes present, curling over the hedges in warm, sweet waves before vanishing again. The more they watched, the clearer it became that this was no small-time operation. The number of different people arriving suggested a network rather than a single owner. Ledger entries later found in police evidence would confirm it. The site was one of several across the country, each feeding product into a carefully managed distribution chain. For now, though, it was only suspicion, pieced together from fragments of information and nights spent in the cold. What troubled the officers most was the precision of the activity. Whoever ran the site understood surveillance risks. There were no long stays, no reckless movements, and certainly no signs of anyone living on site. The work was done in shifts, carried out quickly, and always under the cloak of night. In the rare event that a vehicle approached the farm unexpectedly, the gates would stay closed and the lights inside would dim, leaving no trace of life. Weeks turned into a month, and the decision loomed: wait longer and risk the operation vanishing, or move in before it could change shape. It was a delicate balance. A premature raid could mean catching only a fraction of the people involved. Waiting too long could mean losing the chance entirely. The turning point came when one of the vans was stopped in a neighboring county. Inside, hidden under false flooring, officers found sealed packages, compressed and vacuum-packed, each with a street value in the thousands. It was the link they needed, the proof that the mysterious activity at the poultry farm was part of a large-scale drug network. From that moment, the operation shifted. Plans were drawn, times were set, and the quiet watching of the past weeks gave way to preparation for something far louder. The watchers would soon become the raiders, and the quiet barns in the Cambridgeshire countryside were about to reveal exactly what they had been hiding. If you want, I can now expand Chapter 4 to 600 words so the raid plays out with maximum tension and detail. The raid began before the sun had risen, in the blue-grey hour when the countryside is at its quietest. The lane leading to the old poultry farm was lined with police vehicles, their headlights dimmed, engines idling in the cold morning air. 30 officers were gathered, each briefed on their role. Some wore plain clothes under heavy jackets. Others were dressed in full tactical gear, helmets low, faces set. The sound of boots shifting on gravel and the faint crackle of radios were the only signs of life in the otherwise silent dawn. When the command was given, the convoy moved. The first vehicle rolled forward slowly, then picked up speed as it approached the gates. Within seconds, bolt cutters were in place, snapping through the thick chain like it was wire. The gates swung inward with a metallic groan, revealing the cracked yard beyond. Officers flooded through, spreading in every direction. The air changed. Almost immediately. The sharp, heavy smell of cannabis hit with such force that some officers instinctively pulled scarves over their faces. Ahead, the barns loomed in the dim light, their metal walls streaked with rust. From one of them came a faint, mechanical hum, the sound they had heard so many nights from a distance. This time, they were close enough to feel the heat radiating. From within, the first barn door was wrenched open, and the sight inside made even the most experienced officers pause. Under rows of powerful grow lights, thousands of cannabis plants stood in perfect formation, stretching from one end of the barn to the other. Each was supported by a network of wires, drip-fed by an intricate irrigation system that snaked across the floor. The air was warm, almost tropical, and thick with moisture from the constant misting as officers moved through the rows. Their torches picked out bags of fertilizer stacked against the walls, fans mounted at intervals, and timers set to control the lighting cycles. Everything was ordered, precise, and clearly maintained by people who knew exactly what they were doing. In one corner, sealed bins were filled with harvested buds, ready for packaging. The second barn revealed even more. Here, the plants were in earlier stages of growth, shorter, bushier, but just as carefully tended. Along one wall, tables held heat lamps for seedlings, their delicate leaves trembling under the artificial glow. This barn also housed a hidden compartment, discovered when an officer noticed a section of wall that sounded hollow when tapped. Behind it, in a cramped, windowless space, they found boxes of vacuum-sealed cannabis, each block wrapped in plastic and labeled with coded numbers. In another small room, the evidence deepened. On a desk sat a ledger, its pages filled with figures and shorthand that would later be matched to distribution schedules and payment records. Beside it were photographs of other properties, some urban, some rural, and several maps with markings in red ink. A battered laptop was still running, its screen displaying what appeared to be a security camera feed from other sites. While the evidence was collected, officers continued to secure the property. 2 men were found hiding in an outbuilding, attempting to escape through a rear door that led into the trees. Both were detained quickly, handcuffed and escorted to waiting vans. Another man was found inside the first barn, crouched behind a stack of fertilizer bags. None of them resisted. Their expressions were blank, as if they had been expecting this day to come. Outside, the yard became a hive of activity. Officers photographed every angle, drones hovered overhead to capture aerial views, and a steady stream of seized items was carried out to marked evidence vans. The scale of the discovery was undeniable. Over 2,000 plants in total, with a street value estimated at £1.8 million. The site was not just a grow operation, it was a production hub, designed to feed a network stretching far beyond Cambridgeshire. By the time the last officers left, the sun had risen over the flat fields, casting long shadows across the now empty barns. The air still carried the lingering scent of the plants, but the hum of machinery had fallen silent. The gates were locked again, this time under police control, and the quiet lane returned to stillness. The difference was that now, the secret the farm had kept for years was out in the open, and its discovery was only the beginning of a much larger unraveling. If you want, I can now expand Chapter 5 to 600 words, showing how the entire network crumbled after the bust. That's where all the hidden connections and final twists can come to light. the arrests did not end on the morning of the raid. What began in the barns of a forgotten Cambridgeshire farm quickly spread outward, tracing a web of connections that reached far beyond the county's quiet borders. The 3 men detained at the scene were only the first threads to be pulled. Once they were in custody, detectives began examining their phones, bank accounts, and travel histories. Within days, new names surfaced: drivers, suppliers, intermediaries, each linked to another address, another meeting place, another storage unit. The seized ledger from the hidden room proved to be a key. Every line of coded entries marked a delivery, a payment, or a collection point. Dates were matched against the movement of vehicles caught on CCTV from towns across the region. It became clear that the Cambridgeshire site was only one node in a much larger network. Similar grow operations were quietly running in warehouses, rented houses, and remote outbuildings in other counties, all feeding into the same supply chain. The police worked quickly, knowing that the network would be scrambling to cover its tracks. Raids were launched in London, Birmingham, and Manchester, uncovering more cannabis farms, each with the same methodical setup: heat lamps, irrigation systems, and plants arranged in perfect lines. In some places, the equipment had already been dismantled, evidence of hurried attempts to erase the operation before law enforcement arrived. Even so, the remains told the story clearly enough. The investigation reached across borders. Traces of money transfers led to accounts in Eastern Europe and Spain. One particular lead took officers to a rented villa near the coast of the Costa del Sol. There, in the early hours of the morning, Spanish police, working with UK investigators, detained a man believed to be the operations architect. He had never set foot in the Cambridgeshire farm, yet his fingerprints were found on documents stored in its hidden room. He controlled the business through layers of trusted contacts, believing the distance would shield him from any consequences. In total, more than a dozen people were arrested over the following months. Vehicles were seized, some with secret compartments, built for transporting packages without detection. Large sums of cash, often bundled in elastic bands, were recovered from safes, floorboards, and even inside furniture. Bank accounts linked to the suspects were frozen, cutting off the financial lifeline of the operation. The impact on the local community was immediate. For years, the old poultry farm had been a silent landmark, its true purpose unknown even to those who passed it daily. Now it was front-page news, its image splashed across newspapers and television screens. Residents were shocked at the scale of the bust, especially the £1.8 million valuation placed on the plants. For many, the most unsettling part was how close it had all been, how something so large and illegal could hide in plain sight without drawing serious attention until the very end court. The evidence spoke for itself. Photographs of the barns, aerial thermal images, bank records, and the contents of the ledger painted a picture of a highly organized and profitable criminal enterprise. The men arrested at the farm received lengthy prison sentences. Others, captured in the follow-up raids, faced similar fates. The man arrested in Spain was eventually extradited to the UK, where he was convicted as the mastermind behind the operation. Once the legal process was over, the property was seized under proceeds of crime legislation. The barns were demolished, their concrete floors cracked and pulled up, leaving nothing but open ground. For a time, the land sat empty, a scar in the middle of the flat fields. Nature began to reclaim it, grass pushing through the soil, wildflowers scattering across the clearing. For Cambridgeshire, the case became a milestone in law enforcement history, not just for the value of the drugs seized but for the way it dismantled a network operating across the country. It was a reminder that no place, however quiet or ordinary it may seem, is beyond the reach of organized crime. The old farm was gone, the machinery dismantled, the plants destroyed. But for those who had spent months watching from the shadows, the memory of its hidden life remained, a quiet patch of countryside that had once been at the center of something far bigger than anyone could have guessed.